chat live stream where we get together as a community and talk about photography. And as always, I appreciate everyone joining me today. And I always like the audience to drive the conversation. So if you have any topics or questions you have, just leave them in the chat section, and I'll do the best I can to cover that. Also, I am running my streams this month ad-free, so shouldn't be any interruptions from ads from YouTube, and so I'm going to rely on your support through memberships and donations, and using my affiliate links down below for anything you might want to purchase from Amazon or B&H or DxO. So it's all greatly appreciated. Also, your participation in the stream and clicking the like button, subscribe, all that good stuff is a great way to support the community here, and all the work that I do on this channel to help photographers with their cameras and gear and finding good deals. So it's been a busy, busy week for me. I've been doing a lot of live streaming all week because of the Prime Day sales. So I hope a lot of you got some good deals. I certainly did. I didn't buy as much as I wanted to because it adds up pretty quick. But I got like a few good things that I'm excited about coming in, and and I'm exhausted. I just got back like less than an hour ago from another photo walk. I've been getting up like 4:30 in the morning for the last few days to go out and do some photography, and oh my goodness. So you know, I haven't caught up on all my sleep yet because it's like when I know I have to get up at 4:30, I can't I can't sleep the night before because I'm anxious about waking up. And it's ironic because I normally get up 4:35 a.m. anyway. Uh, so it's just I don't know, but there's that. So I'm very tired today, so I apologize if I'm a little slower than normal. Which reminds me, if you are watching the stream after I go live, you can always set the speed to 1.5x and watch the stream, and you can still pretty much keep up with my speech here. Unlike a lot of uh, my fellow peers here on YouTube, you know, I I don't talk that fast. You guys can keep up pretty easily. A lot of channels I have to slow down sometimes to like you know 0.75 or whatever because they just talk so fast and I can't keep up myself. But good to see you. Let me go ahead and open up the chat window, and I see Anthony's here. Good to see you, and you have some commentary there, so I'll get to those. And Kevin, always good to see you. And for those of you that don't know, Kevin is sort of a celebrity in Florida, helping a lot of people out. I appreciate you sharing the videos of you being interviewed by sort of the local news channels and things. So it's great to have you here as well. And George, good to see you. ATR Bear, Marsha, always good to see you. And Jew, Robert, Marco, Marco, Marco showed off his new OM5 Mark II, and it is purely a cosmetic purchase, right? We really love that color, and I think they're in stock now locally here for me. So I'm debating about picking it up myself. I want it. Trust me, I want it because I love that sand beige color, but I just spent a boatload on, you know, cameras and gear and stuff with the Prime Day stuff, so I'm a little bit running a little thin. And John, gosh, thank you so much, John. I really appreciate the super chat. It's another great way to support the live streams. And you say you shot high contrast black and white with the OM3 and the 17 1.8 version 2. Really fun. Bought the grip from your Prime Day. Oh, awesome. So hopefully that came in. What do you think? It should be a good grip because I've bought grips from Hogue before. And I may have put a couple other grips in there that had wood handles and things, but all of them seem to be make a big difference. And the grip on the OM3 is that, this is one of the things that a lot of people uh, talk about is that it's hard to hold the camera without a grip, and that's a given. They went more form over function with this camera, and but it's easy enough to buy third-party grips. And for me, the grip is really not so much about holding the camera to take pictures because you're always generally using two hands anyway, so the grip's not that critical. But it's when you're carrying the camera and you're holding it sideways, and the occasional time you do want to do one-handed, uh, shots. The grip makes it a lot easier. Even just a little subtle bump like this comes out. And then one more thing I want to mention is the you may have noticed the quality of the stream is not like, well, it's a little worse than normal. But I have a new webcam coming in. I had to put my webcam on, so I'm using my webcam now instead of my normally I have my EM5 Mark III, or I used to use OMD EM10 Mark II, but that's kind of flaking out on me after 10 or 12 years of using that. And I've dropped it so many times. It's been abused. That that camera though, I think is still one of the finest cameras ever made, and is still valid today. That said, uh, the I did get a couple of new cameras, and nothing fancy, just really cameras that uh, were kind of fun, and I really think I'll enjoy, and I did enjoy taking out one of my new cameras. This one here, I do have some pictures now. This is a little toy camera, okay? It's a TLR style, and you actually have the viewfinder here on top. But I haven't had a chance to really take it out and use it. What's interesting, other than taking crappy pictures from the top here, is when you turn this handle, it actually records video for 5 or 6 seconds, or until you stop cranking it. So if you crank it, it'll start to record for I think 5 seconds and then stop, uh, unless you continue to crank it. And the ironic part is, this thing is clicky, so your the video gets jittery as you're turning the handle. It's kind of silly. I wish there was a way to start the video and just let it run, but I'll show you one or two clips from this. But yeah, it takes terrible pictures, but it's still fun. Uh, the other one is I got this with the help and advice from one of my viewers here, X Meta. I got the Pentax K3. This is the Mark One. They're up to a Mark III now, which I had the K3 Mark III monochrome, and that's the camera that kind of got me really looking at Pentax very seriously. Because I had a Pentax, or I do have a Pentax K10 Mark D or K10D from, gosh, that camera's really old. And it has the old CCD sensor, and it was great, but it developed a back focusing issue, which I'm still trying to fix. Supposedly there's I've been in the Pentax forums trying to figure out a solution. There's been several solutions offered, through software and going into the service menu and cleaning the autofocusing sensor under the mirror. So far, I'm struggling trying to fix that. It's not worth sending in to repair, obviously, if there's anybody that could do it. So that kind of inspired me to look at another Pentax color camera, and turns out this K3 fit the bill perfectly. It's 24 megapixel APS-C, has all the functionality of the K3 Mark II, and most of the functionality of a K3 Mark III. Uh, so yeah, and I'm starting to get a feel for the autofocus and getting this thing to lock on and accurately focus. But that has been my biggest challenge with not only this, but my monochrome camera. But I'm starting to get a feel for the settings I need to use and how the camera behaves. You sort of start to get a feel for your camera and getting the most out of it. So for the most part, I'm getting sharp pictures now out of both this K3 and the K3 monochrome. But there's still a few misses. It's nowhere near as good as my own system cameras. Uh, for whatever reason, it's just not as good. So there's that. But yeah, this and I got this for 300 bucks. I didn't care if it was black or silver, but because they had multiple ones at that price point. But this one only had 5,000 clicks on the shutter for a 10 or 12-year-old camera. That's pretty good, and it's in great shape. Uh, the one thing I noticed that is a little bit weak is the pop-up flash. I have to kind of jiggle it a little bit for it to work. Uh, I guess the contacts or whatever down here have worn, or I've gotten maybe a little bit of oxidation on it where it's, the contacts aren't quite as good as they used to be. But this camera has a lot in it. In fact, you even have an option for graduated filter function. Uh, you can add a GPS module for star tracking, and so you can get long exposures. It really has a lot of the similar computational features. Not a lot, but it has a few of the computational features that we find in our modern digital cameras, like the OM3. That said, the OM3 is still my favorite camera, really, of all time at this point. And I had a lot of fun with it today. I use you might notice this weirdo lens. I have this on my deal page, robtrek.com/deals. This is a 25 millimeter CCTV lens, f1.4. It's, of course, going to be manual focus, but it's only $25, and it creates, swirly bokeh. And I'll show you some images from this. I did a video on this probably 8 or 9 years ago about this lens, and there seems to be some new lenses coming out from TT Artisans or Seven Artisans that do swirly bokeh or soap bubble type bokeh. This lens will do excellent swirly bokeh for $25. You don't have to spend $200, $300 for a lens. My other lens here does excellent soap bubble bokeh. Let me show you that one. Uh, this one here, and it's also a CCTV lens. And the reason these lenses have that kind of characteristic is because they're very poor quality. They don't use a lot of lens elements, and the image circle for the CCTV cameras are very small. So that's why there's so many defects in the image quality. In this case, soap bubble bokeh. And when you look at the lens designs of the uh, recently released lenses from the third parties, like there's a 100 millimeter soap bubble bokeh lens. It only uses 3 lenses, so it's an interesting lens. I would get it, but the problem is it's a 100 millimeter focal length. I'm not doing 200 millimeters, equivalent on my Micro Four Thirds cameras. Even on a full frame camera, 100 millimeters is very tight in turn. It's basically a short telephoto lens. So I think if you want, so this is a 35, so this equates to a 70 millimeter. So this is an excellent portrait lens when you have speculars in the background, uh, and you get a soap bubble effect. And this one here, this little tiny one, 25 millimeter, is a 50 millimeter equivalent. So a nifty 50, f1.4 with swirly bokeh. And it's actually quite sharp, this lens. It's actually quite sharp in the center. So I'll show some pictures I took today with this lens, and some pictures I took yesterday with the other lens. This lens here, I have this giant lens hood on it. It doesn't help. I was trying to improve the contrast. The contrast is pretty low on this lens. It's not bad, but it's not great. And and of course, there's no coatings, so there's a lot of flaring. So this does help with the flaring, though. But you can see this is a very small lens, and it looks great on my Pen F, on my OM3, any silver bodied. This is available in black as well for, uh, if you want black. Not on Amazon. You have to go to eBay. So a lot of times you'll find this on eBay. This is about a $30 lens. On Amazon, it's they don't include the micro four thirds adapter, so you have to buy that separately. So you're gonna end up paying about $42 if you buy this off Amazon. If you buy it off eBay, you can probably get it with the adapter in black or silver for about $30. But depending on where you live, you can pay tariffs and taxes and things, and that's more of a recent challenge for us here in the United States are the tariffs. Because I used to buy a lot of things on eBay from Japan and other places, China. So I have to be a little bit more critical or more aware of the pricing of things. But that's okay. I mean, I don't have to buy from China or Japan, or I don't have to buy from outside the United States. There's lots of things here. Okay, and then see Lauren here. Let me jump to this. Lauren, thank you so much for your support. Uh, $4, man, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So it seems like these streams without ads is awesome because $4 is about all I make off the ad revenue. And YouTube's going to take about 40% of the super chats, but that's okay. You can't put a price on uh, the how much I appreciate any kind of donation. It really helps me out a lot, not only financially, but also in my spirit and my enthusiasm for coming out and doing these streams with you guys. It makes all the difference in the world, and you can't put a price on that. Being able to spend some time together with like-minded individuals and my friends. I like to think of you guys as my friends. And I see Marcia, Robert. Sorry, my chat just jumped everywhere. uh, And Paul says, "Did you get my emails on the time lapse and also on mounting examples?" I did see the mounting examples of the M42 adapter, and I can't address it here today because I need to look at the adapters that I'm recommending a little bit more closely. But there's a lot of M42 lenses that have a little pole for the aperture that sticks out that makes using an adapter, not possible, right? So I have to do a little more due diligence before I can really talk about it because it's not an issue that I've run into because I don't have any M42 lenses personally, but I have recommended M42 lenses here on the channel, or not recommended, but some of you have brought up like the way this came about is, have you tried the Helios 442 or those lenses that are M42 mount? And I said, well, you're going to need an adapter. So I made a recommendation for an adapter for M42 so that you can use the Helios, which is not a lens that I own. And Paul brought up that there's poles, metal rods or poles that stick out that can interfere with attaching the lens or making it impossible to attach the lens or potentially damaging the camera. So I I like I said, I haven't dived into it, but I will look into it some more. And when I'm a little more uh, fluent in that particular issue, then I will talk about it in maybe next week's stream. So I appreciate you sending the photos and everything so I can get a closer look to analyze what the issue is. And I did not see the emails on the, oh, I think, yeah, I did see the time lapse email as well. That was pretty cool. That was awesome. There was a couple of skips in it, which you talked about So basically, what Paul did is he did a time lapse at a what do you call those observatories? So there's an observatory and some other structures there, and a time lapse of the stars going in the galaxy, right? Milky Way galaxy, kind of bending around the horizon, and that was awesome. I don't have any suggestions for you because you'd asked what any recommendations. I think you did a great job as it is, being able to expose the foreground and the sky in a single exposure is not an easy thing to do because you don't have any control a lot of times over the exposure for the foreground. It's the light is what it is. You're exposing for the Milky Way. And I don't know if you did any post processing on any of those images, but the final result, the final time lapse, looked really good. I couldn't have done any better myself, to be honest. Okay. Um, and Abilio, good to see you. The Great Vanzini, Plug Nichols. Let's see. I'm just going to get through a few more down here, and then we'll go back and go to the top with Anthony's commentary there. Yeah, I had gas when Marco opened the OM5 Mark II also. I was like, man, I went right to the website to see if it's in stock. I believe it is in stock now. At least it was this morning, but they're not open today. Thank God, because I'd probably be down there now buying an OM5 Mark II sand color. uh, okay, I'll come back. Uh, Let me go to the top, and because this Anthony is not alone in this commentary here, but says OM system needs to bring out an all new OM1X or OM1 Mark III with all new stacked sensor, even if it's only 24 megapixels of resolution. All new double horsepower image processor for faster processing. And he continues on to say, I went from using a 16 megapixel sensor camera to 20 megapixel of resolution and seen new spot difference overall my old camera. Let's see a new sensor with 4 extra megapixels. So you're seeing basically an increment in the quality of your images in terms of resolution, going from 16 to 20. So Anthony is very, very critical of detail, right, in his photos to be able to notice from 16 to 20. Because in my images, I don't look for it because it's not necessary for the kind of images that I take. Uh, but if you are looking for certain details in your image, the more pixels, the better, right? And says, I would like to see them bring out 28 megapixel sensor. Not sure if it's possible with such a small sensor, meaning the dimensions of micro four thirds, uh, without degrading image quality, right? Because at least I'm not an engineer, so I don't know what the limits are of pixel density for a when they're developing a sensor. So here are my thoughts, generally speaking. Well, I think that if OM system does come out with a say 24 megapixel sensor, it will certainly make it'll certainly be a nice improvement, right? I don't know if it'll really add any value to the audience that OM systems is targeting that much, to be honest. To go from 20 to 24 megapixels is, in my mind, it's even a smaller percentage, right, than going from 16 to 20. Because going 16 to 20 percentage wise, that's 4/16, that's 25% improvement. And then going from 20 to 24, that's a 20% improvement, right? Or more pixels. So the jump, another 4 megapixel jump, there's the diminishing returns, right? If you keep doing it in 4 megapixel increments. So I think they should really go to 28 if they can, or 33. But this is where the challenge runs, right? Is the higher the pixel density, from a practical standpoint, with the current sensor technology, the higher the pixel density, the smaller the more noise you're going to get from the sensor, or not more noise, but the ratio of noise versus the amount of light gathered per pixel is going to start to narrow. Because right now we have a certain noise floor here, and then we have the pixel up here. But if you reduce the size of the pixel, the ratio between noise and light gathered gets narrower. So now you have a lot of noise. You're going to have more noise relative to the amount of light gathered, and hence the overall image is going to be more noisy. You have weird color shifts and things like that. So the challenge is that because they can certainly fabricate higher density pixels. We see it in cell phones, right? Tiny sensors that have 20 megapixels, whatever. They do have very high pixel density sensors out there, so it's not a fabrication issue. The issue is really the noise floor, right? How much noise is the camera and the sensor generating when you turn it on? And that creates this floor of where there's just a bunch of noise in here. So this is off, the sensor's off, you turn it on, and then bip, you got a certain amount of like electronic uh, activity going on that creates noise, right? Whether it's electromagnetic or just electrons flying around, whatever. I can't define noise specifically because, again, I'm not an engineer, but I do understand the basic idea. So is there a way for them to reduce that noise floor in the camera so that if they do increase the pixel density, can they have a higher ratio of amount of light gathered versus the amount of noise? So that's the challenge. Uh, and I don't know if that's possible, but if it were, if they could turn a sensor on with no noise, then yeah, you can have as many pixels as you want and not have any noise. To a point, because at a certain point, the pixel density, you're going to have a pixel smaller than the actual wavelength of light. So you have a red wavelength coming in that's, let's say, like this. And that entire wavelength can fit inside that pixel. So you have a red pixel, fits right in there perfectly. There's shot noise and things like that where some of the wavelengths go other places. Uh, but if you make the pixel too small, all of a sudden, the wavelength might not fit inside here, right? So that's the red wavelength. The blue wavelength might be a little taller, or actually blue, I think it's even smaller. So now you have a pixel density where sometimes you'll get red, more often you'll get blue, and uh, very often you might get green, whatever the wavelength is. There's infinite number of colors in between. And then what's going to happen is this red wavelength that's going to go into the pixel above versus the pixel below, right? And that's when you start to get effectively diffraction, right? It looks like it's not diffraction, but you start to get smearing between pixels because the all the different colors of light are not coming into a single pixel. And I get it. There's a Bayer array that separates red, green, and blue, but the basic idea is the same. You have a red pixel in the Bayer array are not getting all of the red light. So that's when you start to see weird color shifts and low image quality. Because now, even if even if they could make that sensor pick up, uh, be that small, it's not getting all the light. And I think that's really the biggest challenge of going to higher and higher pixel densities is you have to be able to adjust or compensate for the wavelength, the size of the wavelength of light. Uh, so is 33 megapixels possible? 40 megapixels possible? Sure. And there are cameras out there that have those pixel densities, and you know, the image quality from those sensors is not great. It's not great. We're talking about like compact cameras with a 1 over 2.3-inch sensor having 20 megapixels. If you look at the image quality from those, yeah, it sucks, right? uh, like the sensor in this camera is 1 over, it's really tiny. It's not even 1 over 2.3. It's like 1 over 3 or 1 over 4. It's really, really tiny with 12 megapixels. And yeah, it just sucks. It's a combination of using a plastic lens and high pixel density. But, you know, uh, but I just want to kind of touch on a couple of the technical issues that I see happening when they try to develop higher megapixel sensors, right? Higher pixel density sensors. And we're really near that limit uh, already with many cameras. And I don't know from that point. From that point forward, I can't, you know, talk about because we're getting beyond my basic understanding of sensors. So, but when you start reading about these things, these two issues come up, right? The noise floor, because our older cameras, like my K3, the noise floor is a little bit higher than the noise floor, say, in my OM1. Uh, so ultimately, I do get, I think, better. I'll compare side by side later, but I'm sure I'm getting better image quality out of my OM1 than this K3. Certainly better than my K10, because that uses the old CCD technology, and that had a very high noise floor. Okay, and it makes sense because CCD sensors require a lot more energy to run because they're on all the time, and hence the noise floor is going to be higher because their design is totally different than CMOS. Okay, uh, so if they do come out with a 24, and I can see when I look at Panasonic's G9 Mark II versus say the OM1, I do see more noise at higher ISOs on the G9 Mark II because it has a higher pixel density. So the noise floor versus the amount of light gathered is smaller than it is on the OM1 and OM3, hence more noise on higher pixel density sensor. And the G9 Mark II is state of the art, right? They're in terms of the camera technology, the electronics, the fabrication of the boards, and all the technology that goes into that camera. And it's not like they were trying to miniaturize it, because there's always compromises when you miniaturize things. I mean, they did miniaturize it, but not to the extent that they would have to, say, like in the OM3. And even with all of that they did, just that bump to 24, 20, it's a 25 megapixel sensor, I think. I can see a difference in the noise on that camera versus the OM3. So we're not there yet. At least Panasonic and OM Systems is not there yet in terms of developing a sensor that can have a higher pixel density without sacrificing image quality like noise, dynamic range, and all of those fun things. Uh, and I don't see, honestly, going OM Systems at least cranking out a 24 or higher megapixel sensor for years. I think we're going to be using the 20 megapixel sensor for the next 3 to 5 years. Uh, and I'm okay with that, right? But a lot of people are not going to be okay with that. Uh, and it could mean the survival of OM systems in general to be able to check that box. But OM systems, they have a philosophy of we don't want to compromise the image quality for the sake of checking a box that we're at 24, 25 megapixels now. Because I'm sure they could do it. They could go to, there's there's got to be a 25 megapixel sensor off the shelf they can buy from Sony and put in their cameras. Add a little R&D to adapt it to their camera bodies, and bing, you're good. That said, that's right now what's stopping OM System from doing it is they probably looked at the available sensors that they can get off the shelf, and based on their philosophy of image quality versus resolution, they've decided not to incorporate that into their camera systems, unlike Panasonic that did. And I don't want to put any shade on the Panasonic G9 Mark II. It's a fabulous camera, and it does an excellent job. Okay, and if you want the extra resolution, there's a little bit of a compromise in high ISO noise and um, overall performance of not being a stacked sensor. The readout speed is still pretty decent, but it's not an all-in-one, right? With respect to that. So, uh, and it doesn't matter for a lot of photography. But I'm just saying, there's always compromises that are not really addressed in all the YouTube video reviews that you see about cameras and the challenges that go into, because it would just bore people to tears. You know what I mean? And honestly, it's probably a topic that me and a lot of other creators here online should not be talking about to begin with, because we don't know what we're doing. We're not engineers, right? We're not electrical engineers designing sensors. Because you can be an engineer, electrical engineer, but if sensors are not your particular area or genre of, you know, eh, you can give an educated guess, much more so than any of us online can. But unless they bring out the engineers that from Sony, because Sony's the one making the sensors, unless you have interviews with Sony engineers, how are we ever going to know, right? Or ex-Sony engineers. Well, that can put it in layman's terms for us to understand, uh, and then be believable, right? Because you don't know what the motivation is behind a company's decision to do things sometimes. So whatever talking points or interviews or whatever they say, you always have to take with a grain of salt, because you don't know what the motivation is behind a lot of the decisions they make when designing a camera, and what contingencies are there beyond just putting in a high res sensor. So what's the chain of contingencies from 20 megapixels to the board to the processing, and getting to the processing power? Again, I don't know, none of this is published, right? What is the uh, fabrication process for developing the sensor, and who develops the sensor? Who designed it? Are they using a 4 nanometer fabrication process, a 2 nanometer? At some point, again, you get down to where the actual uh, wires and things that you have inside of a processor are the size of one atom, right? Which they do have. They can design, they can fabricate processors now where the actual wire going through the circuits is only the width of like a single atom, is what I've read. I don't know how true that is, but you can't make a wire less than one atom. Uh, Again, like I said, I've seen it. I've seen these articles, and we're getting into an area that I should not be talking about, because I don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to stop there on that. But I will say that in general, when you want more powerful processor, it's going to require more energy from your battery. So you're going to compromise battery life for a more powerful processor. Because at or near the limit of the fabrication process of the processor in terms of the nanometers of the wiring and the circuits, you're not going to get a lower energy processor, right? Uh, all you can do is add more circuits to help with the processing, you know, re-engineer the architecture of the processor so it's more efficient. Like a great example is the M chips from Apple and the new AI chips coming out from Intel. It's really a complete redesign in the architecture of processing that has improved processing power for very specific tasks, which is ideal for a camera, improving processing power for a very specific task without requiring more energy. So it's going to require quite a bit of investment. And, we're still on TruePic 10. We have been for a few years now. If they're working on a TruePic 11, I don't know who designs the processors for OM systems. I don't know who does that fabrication. Again, it's way beyond what's generally publicly available. But Sony was able to bring in a specific AI processing chip separately for a dedicated task for their autofocus recognition and stuff. And it didn't really drain that much more from the camera because, again, this is a very specific task processor that requires very little energy. A more general processor for photography, and photography in of itself is very niche. If they want to try to create a more powerful processor, I think at the current technology and fabrication that they have for these chips, it's going to draw more energy and shorten the battery life. Uh, so I'll leave it there. That's all I know. If I say anything more, uh, I'm just guessing, you know. But I'm trying to give an educated guess or things for you guys to think about when you see new cameras come out, right? Uh, it's not a small thing to engineer a compact camera that has all of this power and computational power and high pixel density and still be reasonably priced and consumer friendly and high performance, all of those things. It's a huge deal. And in my opinion, OMSys is doing an excellent job releasing this new 20 megapixel stack sensor from a couple of years back. It's been what, 3 years now or so? Was a big leap for OM systems. And now it's it's the most powerful stack sensor. Well, let me rephrase that. It's the only it's the it's the most affordable stack sensor camera you can buy, and that's inherently true because of the fabrication processor of making sensors, because they put them on these wafers or silicon discs, and you can cut out hundreds of micro four thirds sensors on a single platter versus maybe 100, like 100. I don't know what the numbers are exactly, but you can maybe cut out, you know, 40 or 50 full frame sensors on a single platter versus a micro four thirds sensor. You can cut out hundreds of them on the same platter. And then there's a defect rate. So if you have a defect rate of, you know, 1% over the surface area, if 1% of the surface area of the uh, platter is defective, that could affect 4 or 5 sensors on full frame, but it may only affect 50 or 60 sensors if it's a micro four thirds fabrication. And that ratio of cost per sensor versus defect rate, because the platter size is the same, regardless if you're making micro four thirds or full frame. Micro four thirds sensors are just cheaper to make, ultimately, right? Okay. Wow, I spent a lot of time on that, but uh, Anthony brought up a lot of things that people want out of the systems, and I wanted to sort of rationalize why I think we're still 3 to 5 years away from getting any of those things that he's talking about. Okay. Uh, Although I hope, I'm always hopeful they'll do it sooner than later, but I don't expect it. Okay, and then Marcia says, "Have you considered photography in infrared? I'm getting back into it and need help with post-processing." Yeah, I have to get back into it. My post-processing of my infrared images is not great. I'm not getting great results, but I'll try and do some because it's summertime. That's the best time to do it because we have really strong light, lots of foliage. So I'll get into that. Thanks for reminding me. Just remind me every stream to get into that. And let me see some other chat. Make sure if I missed your question, don't hesitate to ask me again. I don't mind. Okay, Lauren says the OM5 with the Lumix 14 or 15 is a great street camera. It has 1/8,000 shutter. I have the Olympus 25 and 45 to use with the camera and a wonderful 30 macro. Yeah, I think those are both great lenses. Especially the Leica 15, I would get that over the 14 unless you need ultimate compact size. Then get the 14. It's a 2.8 lens. Uh, Whereas the Leica, it's a bigger lens, but it's still very small, very fast at 1.7, and the image quality is excellent. Really super fine contrast, very contrasty lens. Uh, so inherently, it's going to be sharper. It's an excellent lens. 25 to 45, those are great lenses from OM Systems or Olympus. I use them, you know, time to time, not all the time, but time to time. I don't use the 45 too much, but when I do, I'm never disappointed with the result. And they're very compact uh, and do a great job. And the 1/8,000 shutter is critical for if you're shooting mechanical shutter. That allows you to shoot at these wide open apertures if you need to. And I've heard some organizations, yeah, there's some agencies out there where their clients uh, want at least 25 megapixels or whatever. We're talking about relatively high-end commercial work where the client is going to be using the images for multiple platforms, right? They want to be able to crop in and use parts of the image for certain distribution or certain media, and they want to be able to use the full image for other types of media. And I don't know who those clients are. It's not my genre, but yeah, certain agencies are going to require 25 megapixels, whether or not the client needs 25 megapixels, because one agency is going to have several clients. Not every client needs 25 megapixels, but some of them will. So the agency is saying, going forward, any images you submit, you know, I we they need to be 25 megapixels because some of our clients require 25 or more. So we're just going to require it on a blanket level. Uh, but it's not my area. I don't work with agencies. I don't have an agent, you know, and because I remember Jimmy Chang talked about getting the 25 megapixel GH6 or whatever because the agency he worked with only accepted that size going forward. But it's not, as enthusiasts and hobbyists, what do we care, right? What agencies want. And this is comments. I've seen that one. That's my chat jumped up. You have an EM53 and a K3. OM5, yeah, it makes no sense at all. I have an OM3 and OM1. an A7R5, a K3 Mark II. I got cameras. What do I need another camera for? But every camera I bought, aside from the OM1, the EM1 Mark III, EM1 Mark II, those cameras I actually use for work, right? I don't have the Mark II and Mark III anymore. I've upgraded to the OM1 Mark I. Those are the only cameras that really make sense. Everything else I've bought is pretty much just for uh, just gas. I'm a collector, you know. I, the OM1 Mark I really solved my issue with the video side. Being able to record in 10-bit video gave me some better quality images because I shoot a lot of high dynamic range scenes in video, and being able to recover some shadows and keep some of the highlights a little better gave me that flexibility. The image stabilization is the best on the OM1 versus the other cameras I've tried. Like I originally had a Panasonic S5, but the image stabilization one wasn't as good. So I have to put more effort on site to get a smooth image versus the just getting it straight out of the camera on an all-in-one. You know, and before anyone makes any comments, if you're watching this later, and this is really true for any kind of discussion we have. A lot of times, either I or other creators, because I watch a lot of other videos, I'll see comments in the section about solutions, right? Or reasons to or not to do something, right? But they're very general. It's very difficult for someone to make a comment or suggestion without knowing the full context of the use case of the person. So, like in my case, like the OM1, for example, the stabilization difference, say, between the OM1 and S5, from a consumer standpoint, doesn't look like that much difference, even on paper. On paper, even less so. But in practice, for the use case that I have, I put it onto a dolly, a tripod dolly, and I have to roll the camera on the floor. Even on a smooth tile floor, there's very minute bumps and ridges in the tile floor. And these minor vibrations are picked up very easily on the camera. In fact, they're exaggerated as that vibration transmits up through the tripod onto the camera. And I can tell you the OM1 has a lot less jitter in that particular application than my S5 did. It has the least jitter of any camera I've ever used, and I've tried them all. So someone will make a comment like, "Well, just use a gimbal, right? And catwalk." Yeah. Well, now now we're affecting the overall output of the kind of video that I'm going to be creating. Catwalking through a property versus using a dolly is a big difference in the presentation of the property. I do catwalk for some of the rooms in different areas of the building uh, because you can't use a dolly. But for the most part, using a dolly, and I use a gimbal, an electronic gimbal on the dolly itself. So I'm stacking a dolly with a tripod. I'm stacking a gimbal with a tripod and the dolly underneath. So I have like 3 layers here, all amplifying the vibration from the floor. But you know, I'm not saying don't comment. Please comment and share your ideas, whether you agree with me or not, because I learn a lot from the comment section as well. over and over again, I've been corrected and enlightened in some cases, not corrected necessarily, but sometimes I'm enlightened, right? So I really, but just what I'm trying to temper are sort of the more critical comments uh, that you have to understand the context of my use case or whatever topic we're talking about. It doesn't have to be me. It could be about something we're talking about. And I very rarely get any critical comments. I mean, I got one yesterday or today about I need to apologize to Tony because of I he made a video about tripods that you don't need a tripod, and I felt that argument's pretty weak. Uh, so I just responded, yeah, I can see to the point that Tony made about capturing an eagle because you're hand holding, you can get it right away because of the flexibility of being handheld versus being on a tripod, you're not flexible, you're planted, right? But my argument essentially is you have to understand the use case. I have a lot of, you know, senior ladies that I go out with in the field, and they have a 200 to 800 or 200 to 600 with a Sony A1. They cannot handhold that camera. They have to use a tripod, right? Tony didn't address that. He did not. I could watch it again. Maybe he did, but I don't recall him addressing physical limitations uh, that people may have that basically require them to use a tripod with the camera lens system of their choice. I always tell people get Micro Four Thirds. Ultimately, it's a smaller, lighter setup, and you can get the same quality of image, in my opinion. Okay. I mean, I know there's a lot of nuances to that, but uh, people have a camera lens system of their choice that's just, they don't have the option to handhold it. They cannot, right? Maybe for a quick minute, but for the other 2, 3 hours you're sitting there, because I've been to Conowingo Dam many times. And that's one of the things Tony referenced in the video. I've been there many times, and I see the role of photographers there with tripods. A lot of them, they're not young, fit people in shape, right? Tony's in pretty good shape. They're not going to be, whipping up things, you know, a 600 f4 with their A1 when an eagle comes flying over. And what are the odds that eagle is going to do that right in front of them, even if they are ready, you know, for that to happen? So I stand by my opinion that tripods are necessary for a lot of people and preferable for most. I would not, I always recommend get a tripod. Tripods, filters are core to expanding your photography. Are they absolutely necessary? No. But if you want to enjoy photography and expand your photography, a polarizer, an ND filter, a tripod. These are kind of basics, right? Basic accessories uh, that every photographer should have for different kinds of photography. Um, anyhow, that's my little tired rant. Uh, don't stop commenting. Don't stop criticizing me, and don't stop leaving your opinion and feedback. I take it all in and look at it as an opportunity to learn something or revisit my initial opinions and thoughts because one of the epiphanies I had in life was in my early 20s was that, and I can get into a long story about this, but I had a job where the VP called me in and says, I was doing computer stuff back then, so I need you to generate some reports that show this, that, and the other thing, because I'm going to have a bunch of people in here, and uh, I need to show the performance of these portfolios to make my point. I need some statistical data to back up what my point is. So this is the gist of what I want to say. Go give me some statistical data to back this up. So when I go to the meeting, I'm prepared. So I prepared it. No problem. Very easy to do, right? You could flip that around. If he wanted to make the exact opposite point, right? Let's say he wanted to show that the portfolio is not performing. I could easily generate statistics to kind of make that point. Or if you wanted to say, I want to see that the portfolio's performance is improving, give me some statistics to back that up. I could generate a report like that. You know, you can generate statistics to back up any point, right? You just have to be kind of selective. And then a couple of years after that, I was listening to some motivational speaker, and I believe it was Zig Ziglar. He said, the opposite of a truth is another truth. It's not a lie. Usually, the opposite of a truth is another truth. And I thought about it, and that hit me like a ton of bricks, right? Because it reminded me of that meeting I had with the VP years back that directly applied to what that statement. The opposite of a truth is another truth. So when I look at everything I see online, whether it's through comments and emails or just life in general, I never look at anything from just one side. I always try to take in both sides and understand that their truth, what they think their truth is, right? It's not a lie. What they're saying is the truth, even factual. But and it may convince me to change my mind, right? Or my opinion or whatever, and that's okay. I'm always willing. I'm flexible. You know, I'm not rigid in my thinking. Uh, and that's what upsets me a lot of times when I see online in photography. There's very rigid rules or opinions, and I'm like, okay, if that's what you believe, that's fine. You haven't convinced me. You know, you haven't convinced me that you don't need a tripod most of the time. Is kind of what he was implying. You do need one. The more often you can use one, the better. You just have to balance the convenience of handheld versus, there's always trade-offs, right? With a tripod or with any kind of gear. You can go to a monopod. A lot of people can get away with a monopod and not use a tripod. And then all of a sudden, the difference between a monopod and handheld is even narrower, right? It's not the same. Handheld is always the most freewheeling, most flexible way to do photography, but there's levels. So, do you compromise your endurance over using a monopod versus handheld? Because if I was hand holding a lens, after a couple hours, I'm going to get tired, even with micro four thirds. Uh, so it's nice to be able to just rest the camera on a monopod, which I pretty much use monopods now for birding, action, wildlife, and then for landscapes and macro and things like that. I try to use a tripod or tabletop tripod, and then for just street photography and walking around in general, like casual photography. Yeah, I'm not gonna use a tripod. But this week I brought two tripods with me both days. All 3 days that I went out. I brought a little tabletop tripod and I bought, a more conventional tripod for higher lengths. Yeah, it was a little heavy, but I was only going out for 3 or 4 hours. I wasn't going to be there, all day long. And once I got to a certain location, I stayed in one spot. And I ended up not using the tripods at all, to be honest. Uh, but it was nice to have the option to do it if I wanted to get a different kind of shot that would require one. Okay, so yeah, me buying any camera at this point makes no sense. Just it, to Xmeta's point, nothing. There's no reason for me to ever buy. I should sell a few cameras, if anything. Uh, Semjon says, regretted selling my 12 to 45 f4, so I got the 12 to 42.8 for four. Wow, that's a good deal, $450. Missed having a general zoom in the city trip this week. As much as I love primes, changing can be annoying. I know, right? Uh, and this is what I discovered in my own photography was initially, you know, the idea is, because you buy a camera, a lot of times it'll come with a kit lens. In this case, a 12 to 45 f4 is a common kit lens, but in the past it was the 14 to 42 kit lenses, uh, 14 to 150. It was always a zoom. Rarely, at least here in the US, rarely did you get an option as a prime as your kit lens or kit included with the camera. And that gives you the most flexibility for people just getting started in photography. And then once you start to get into photography and you start thinking about composition and you start watching videos on YouTube, they tell you go out with a prime, shoot with one lens, zoom with your feet. Most of the time that works. Sometimes you can't, but zoom with your feet. Uh, think about the composition. It'll help you to slow down and think about the elements in the scene for that particular focal length. And I absolutely 100% agree with that idea of shooting with primes for to develop your composition skills, right? Uh, and then all the other advantages of a prime, less so now with overall image quality, but primes generally should give you just that extra pixel of image quality than a zoom lens. The faster apertures, typically with a zoom lens, uh, you're going to be at 1.8, 1.7, 1.4, 1.2 for the pro lenses. So you have much wider apertures with uh, uh, prime lenses. So you got more light gathering. So you can use faster shutter speeds. So there's a lot of advantages to primes from a photographics standpoint of capturing images. Using faster shutter speeds, lower ISOs, all of that good stuff. And then also from a creative standpoint, if you want a shallower depth of field, you can usually get better results with a prime lens. So no argument there. Prime shooting with prime lenses for the purposes of improving your composition skill set makes a lot of sense to me. And like I said, no argument there. And I did that for a long time. I would just go out with a couple of primes and think about the composition because I'm stuck with particular focal length, either 17 or 25 or 17 or 60, whatever. I'm stuck with a particular focal length or set of focal lengths for any particular scene. Uh, because I've gone out and done street photography with a 17 only. There's a lot of times I've gone out with just a 17. Now at this point in my photography, and everybody's different, right? But I really would rather take a zoom lens out because my style of photography, in terms of composition and style, I don't care about shallow depth of field, right? I'm not worried about it. In fact, I'm going to be shooting at f5.6, f8 most of the time. So the need for the faster prime from that aspect is gone, right? Because I'm not going out at night shooting street photography. I don't need the light gathering. I don't need the shutter speeds for most of my photography. The need for that is gone. Uh, I much rather have the flexibility of being able to zoom in to the composition that I want. And because I spent years on and off shooting with only a prime lens, a specific focal length, I've now developed a particular style and have a very good feel for how I want to capture a scene for a particular focal length. So if I'm going out with the 25, like I'll take the 25 out and I know exactly the compositions I can capture with that 25. When I go out with the 17 and I do any kind of street photography, I know exactly the composition I want to go for. What size do I want the subjects to be in the frame relative to everything else in the frame, and the position of the elements in the frame within that 17 millimeter focal length or field of view. I know exactly what 17 is going to give me and exactly the kind of compositions that I want to take using a 17. So when I get a zoom lens 12 to 40, I can approach a scene and I would think, this scene will really be perfect at 17 millimeters. So I just zoom in. This scene is going to be really good at 25. Uh, this scene here, the composition is perfect, right? If I can just zoom in or out, I don't have to move back and forth, right? Zoom with my feet, so to speak. I can just zoom in right there in the lens. Now, you might think, okay, that within 12 to 40 range, you don't have to worry about compression and all that so much, right? Uh, unless you're getting very close to the subject. It's all relative, lens compression and the composition of the scene. But I'm at a point now where I can just use a zoom lens confidently and not get lazy in my photography because I have a zoom lens. And that's kind of the catch with using zoom lenses all the time is you start to get lazy when you're thinking about your compositions because you just say, oh, I'll just zoom in if I want a little tighter shot. It's okay. So you zoom in to 40 millimeters but again, compression, right, can affect that composition or the look or style of that particular image because of the focal length compression of 40 millimeters versus, say, if you shot wider and got closer, you got a very different perspective. Because you're taking let's just take something simple like a fire hydrant. I can back up, zoom in, and fill the left side of the frame with a fire hydrant. Or I can walk in all the way up close, shoot it at 12 millimeters, fill the left side of the frame with the fire hydrant, but the field of view is very, very different, right? So what do people do? They think, okay, I want to take a picture of this fire hydrant. I'm just going to zoom in and fill the frame. And you're not thinking about the composition or the difference in the field of view if you were to actually walk up closer at 12 millimeters and take the same picture. And that's where I think people say they start to get lazy in their compositions and not thinking about all the elements in that scene. So that's why I did not disagree with the idea of shooting primes all the time, or shooting primes, going out with a 17, going out with a 25, going out with a 45, and not bringing anything else, or just going out with that trifecta, 17, 25, 45, and knowing you're limited to those specific things, but thinking about the composition and field of view for each one. I'm past that now, for the most part. You never stop learning and growing in photography, so I don't want to say I'm done doing that. If I go out with a 45, I will certainly try to improve my compositions for that particular field of view. But I can go out with a 12 to 40 Pro and not feel guilty about it and not get lazy in my compositions, is all I'm trying to say. And if you're at that point, like it seems Semjon is, that it's inconvenient to change lenses when 25 millimeters is going to be the perfect focal length. So you're not being lazy. You want 25 millimeters, or you want 12 millimeters, or you want to shoot this at 40 millimeters. You know what focal length you want to shoot this at. You're not being lazy. You're being very decisive in your decision about the focal length that you want. Yeah, you could have brought three primes and got that shot, but if you had a 12 to 40 Pro, you don't have to swap lenses. You can dial in focal length that you want to get the exact composition that you want. Okay, so anyway, that's that. Let's see. Lauren says, heads up on pricing. The Canon RP is $799 and the Z5 went up to $1099, but it's still good. Pricing on cameras and lenses due to the tariff tax. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is what it is, you know. Uh if you want a camera and the price is within your budget that you put out for buying a camera, just get it, right? Uh you can't sweat over things you have really no control over. And Senjot says also tried the 25 1.82, but sent it back. I like the Pana 25 1.4 more despite some CA issues. Yeah, the chromatic aberration is pretty harsh on that lens, right? I don't have any Panasonic bodies to kind of compare, but I know I have to be conscious of that with that lens. And this goes back to just knowing your gear and getting a feel for your gear. Like I was talking about the Pentax K3, my Pentax cameras, I struggle to get autofocus on those cameras. And it's because I just don't have a feel for it yet. When I shoot with the 25 1.4, I know there's a lot of chromatic aberrations, up to about f4, f5.6 even, there's still some. But knowing that, I'll be very careful about, speculars and things that those kind of aberrations could cause a problem in my image if it's important. Most of the time, chromatic aberration is not a big deal. You just, correct it and post to somewhat. You do lose a little image quality when you do any kind of corrections of post processing, like chromatic aberration. But the final output, the media that you're delivering your final image to, is not going to make any difference. I'm posting Instagram and Flickr. If I clean up the chromatic aberration in post processing, you're not going to be able to see, you know, even if I don't clean it up, a lot of times you can't see it on Instagram anyway because it's all the compression, everything. Uh, but I really love the 25 1.4. I feel like it just renders beautifully, and it's not something you can give an objective. Uh, you can't make an objective point, or I'm tired, so I'm not able to put words together today. It's a very subjective thing, the image quality from the 25 1.4 versus the OM system 25 1.8. Depth of field aside from 1.4 to 1.8 is very minor. That's I wouldn't separate the lenses or make a decision of one lens over the other because 1.4 is a little wider than 1.8. But it is two-thirds of a stop in terms of light gathering, right? So the 1.4 does give you a substantial increase in light gathering ability. So that could be a good reason. But for me, it's more about how the lens render. And it could just be all in my head, but it doesn't matter. What's in my head is reality to me, right? And if I enjoy using that lens, even if I can't explain why I like the rendering from that lens, I enjoy that lens and enjoy shooting with it, right? So, and again, Sam John's in the same place. He really loves, or prefers, I should say, the Leica 25 1.4 over the OM System 25. And I agree. I'm on the same page with you. I just like the rendering and the images I get from that. Speaking of which, I have not shown a single image, and I've been just jibber jabbering. Uh, I ordered a new mouse on Prime Day because the mouse I'm using is I got two mouses here. Both of them are like more than 10 years old. This one's probably at least 10. This one is probably closer to 15. And both of them have different issues. This mouse tracks really well when I move it around, but the scroll wheel is gone. It just, I'll start scrolling and a page won't scroll. It's really flaky. Sometimes it works, but most of the time it doesn't. This mouse, the scroll wheel is perfect, but the tracking is terrible. So I'm trying to move the mouse, and I've moved the mouse across my desk, and it hasn't moved at all on the screen. My God, come on, and I have to tap it and keep moving. Anyway, hopefully the new mouse I get in will solve these problems. And then I'm gonna just chuck these in the trash. But right now, sometimes I'll grab this mouse. I have them both connected right now. Sometimes I'll use this mouse to track, and then I'll use this mouse to scroll. It's a freaking mess over here. Uh, okay. So let's see. Here's an image with 25 1.4. Uh, I love it. I love the rendering from this edge lens. It's a little bit of not swirly, but cat's eye over here, and a little bit of a soap bubble. It's very subtle. I'm shooting wide open here. I would not get this rendering from a 25 1.8. It'd be very, very different. And I just got this just like that. Um, the CCTV 25 millimeter lens. This is a shot I took today with it. This is my swirly bokeh lens. You know, I love it. $25 lens, and it's pretty sharp when it wants to be. This corner is very sharp. The depth of field is very shallow here, so it looks like these leaves and over here came out very good. I have other images that are really sharp. Here's another image from the 25 1.4 CCTV lens. This one has a little bit of a soap. Let me just double check. Yeah, this is the 25. A little bit of a soap bubble effect uh, in this case because there's some speculars in the background and not so much the swirly because I'm shooting vertical. Um, this lens here, I think this is the 35. Yeah. So this is the 35 millimeter CCTV. This is not a great image to really analyze the characteristics of the lens, but you can see it's very soft in vignettes in the corners. It's very soft down in here, and then the center is sharp here, then soft, then sharp again. So this lens has a crazy field curvature where parts of the image will be sharp, other parts will be out of focus, even though they're on the same focal plane. So this lens has terrible field curvature, but then it creates these really interesting images, right? Uh, there's a good example of that. I don't. Oh, I didn't export it. But here, the field curvature doesn't matter, right? Because this is one of those negative space type images, right? And this is a straight out of camera JPEG from my Pen F. I believe this is grainy black and white filter. But in this image, the field curvature doesn't matter because everything is just out of focus. Uh, but in other images, it can make a difference. But the 35 millimeter CCTV lens, this is the soap bubble lens. As you can see here, lots of soap bubbles, right? If I just zoom in a little bit, uh, crazy, crazy soap bubble effect when you have a lot of nice speculars. So you don't need to spend $200 for a soap bubble lens. You can get this one for about $42 with the adapter. Here's another example of the soap bubble effect, again with all the different speculars. Let me zoom in and come up here. Crazy, right? Crazy, crazy soap bubble effect. Uh, but then in other images, this lens, it's not obvious that there's going to be soap bubble effect. This image here, you actually don't even see the field curvature because the only guy in focus is this guy. But you can see some of the, and this is another, I think this is monochrome profile number 2 with medium grain or whatever. But yeah, very soft in the corners. This is not depth of field. This is just the lens. And then sharp in the center. And let's see. I love how this image came out. This was also the 35, yeah. Just beautiful. Because you'll notice that this tree is in focus, but then you go over to this tree's out of focus, this tree's out of focus. So how is this tree more in focus than this tree? It's because of this weird field curvature that we're getting in this lens. And there's no speculars here, so you're not getting any soap bubble effect, but this lens gives you that weird field curvature effect that puts a tree like this is not perfectly in focus, but it's more in focus than even this tree, which is closer to the focal plane. The focal plane is actually right here on this uh, bush. But then this is in focus, this is in focus, this is not in focus. But in theory, everything from here all the way to here should be in focus based on the depth of field that I see. But it's not. This is all out of focus over here. This is out of focus. So I really love the rendering from this lens and field curvature. I think this is a monochrome profile 2 with a medium grain in the Pen F. You can see the corners here are well out of, just blurred. But this is the lens that gives you that soap bubble effect. You can see it a little bit here in these snowflakes, not so much. This is another good example of field curvature. Like if you look at this tree is in focus, this tree is in focus here, but then it's out of focus here. So it goes from in focus to out of focus, in focus. It's just weird, but it creates a really unique image. Uh, so I just wanted to share a couple of the images from those lenses because they are really unique. Swirly bokeh for the 25 and soap bubble and field curvature effects with this lens. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Uh, and the Ray Vancini says, I used to use primes and zoom with my feet. Now at 73, it's all about real zoom lenses. Yeah. And, like I said, there's some point in your photography journey that you know what focal length you want to use for a particular scene because of the compression that particular focal length gives, the field of view it gives, the depth of field that it gives. You know, you want to use that focal length. And a zoom allows you to do that very easily. But you have to develop that skill set, or if you want to develop your skill set in style, go out and shoot with a prime, a 17 prime, right? For example, and develop that skill set in your composition and style. And then whether you use a zoom or a 17 millimeter prime, what difference does it make? The image that you took is all that matters, right? Doesn't matter if you use the zoom at 17 or the prime at 17. And Plug Nichols says most M42 adapters that I have are built to keep the aperture pin pushed in. Otherwise, you can't control the aperture manually. Oh, okay. That makes sense. So I was thinking it's more of a physical error or physical problem of mounting the lens on the adapter with the aperture pin sticking out. But it's more of a can you control the aperture issue? Okay. I mean, I get that because there's adapters that you buy for Nikon that some are G compatible, which do not have a physical thing for the aperture pin, and then there's some that are like not compatible with G lenses, or will work with any lens, but it won't control the aperture on a Nikon G, right? Because it doesn't have the aperture ring on the mount on the adapter. Next method says with enough CPU power, you can kill noise using multiple sample frames for each photo. We are there with phones and cameras are slowly getting there too. I mean, real time, even 1/8,000th of a second. I know, right? I mean, 1/8,000th of a second. I can't think of too many, somebody will think of it, but there's not too many scenarios where if you can capture 10 images in 10/8,000th of a second, right? Because you're capturing each one. Uh, but the problem is most people are shooting at like 1/60th of a second, 1/25th of a second. And then all of a sudden, to capture 10 images is like a 1 second image, right? So you're talking about a 1 second exposure. And then motion blur comes into effect. But, you know, because I know my high res shot mode, it takes what, 8 or 15 images in about 1 second, regardless of shutter speed. It takes about 1 second. So there is still some lag or room for more processing power, even with the current cameras just doing what they do. Somewhere, I can't recall where, OM System discussed using better software algorithms in camera for improved noise management. I know definitely Pentax does that. They apply noise reduction to the raw images, the K1 Mark II, and I believe the K3 Mark III color version does apply some noise reduction in the raw images. Uh, what I heard OM System is doing is trying to improve resolution, but that would inherently, you could also, improve noise, right, in camera. Because that's exactly how DxO works, right? To reduce noise, they have their algorithms that they, use processing power of AI to come up with, uh, doing noise reduction on images. If they can do some of that in camera, why not? But I'd still like the raw data, uh, and then process on a computer because a computer is always going to be more powerful. And Henry Cardio-Bresson and Robert Frank had the best camera sensors located between their ears to improve our images. I'm pretty sure what we need is between our ears and not the pixel count. Yes. So if you're looking at photography from the point of uh, a creative process and art or fine art, what difference does the camera make, right? You just may be able to capture a moment. Uh, Sim just said, but during the city trip, I was really impressed by the OM3 batteries. I took 700 photos in the camera constantly on or before I had to change. The OM5 was out after maybe 300 pics. Yeah, the battery tech and everything that they did with the OM3, the battery life was really good. And my stream is buffering. Yeah, sometimes. The great Fanzini says, I'm trying to get friendly with my Fuji kit again, but compared to the Ollie gear, it's a bit of a fight. Yeah. Yeah, I need to take out my Fuji. It's just sitting there collecting dust. It's terrible. And it's such a great camera system. But it's ironic. I'd rather take out my Pentax than my Fuji, even though the Fuji is better in every single way. I don't know why. I can't put my finger on it. Just like I can't put my finger on why I like the 25 1.4 Leica. There's just something different about the cameras. It's a very personal, subjective thing. And Semjon says the wires are approximately 22 nanometers, 4,000 of them can fit across the width of a human hair. There are lots of hundreds of kilometers in wires in a processor. It's insane. I know, right? So Semjon knows a little bit. Sure, Marco knows a lot of that too. But I've read about CPUs using, 6 nanometer fabrication process. I don't know what the fabrication process is for camera processors, but it's probably not 4 or 6 nanometers. And Henning says, "Yeah, send me one. That would be cool. Send me some. I'm gonna have an editing stream this week again on Friday." And Chuck says, "Would you say that uh, OM System is competing against the used market more than other brands?" Excuse me. The M1 Mark III is still an amazing camera for 700. Uh, no, I would say more broadly, every camera system is struggling against the used market, particularly the flagship models, right? The flagship models like the EM1 Mark III, the Canon R5, the Nikon Z8 or Z9, these cameras just, once they go used, the prices just crash. Uh, the older they get, Nikon D850, these older flagship cameras. The more mid-range stuff, there's more demand for, and then these weirdo, stupid, compact point and shoots are ridiculous. They're selling for more than they were used. Uh, and the irony, and I think at that point, camera manufacturers may be competing with the used market because there's so many on the used market. Because I haven't heard Panasonic, Canon, they've come out with new compact cameras. I don't know how they're doing, right? How are they competing that you can buy a brand new compact camera from Canon or Panasonic for about the same price as a 20-year-old piece of crap compact point and shoot? I mean, I'm exaggerating. There's probably a little more variance there. But if you pay more than $25 for a 20-year-old point and shoot, it just makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me why you would do that. There'd have to be something really special about that camera that you'd want to do that. I mean, but who knows? Prices are subjective on the used market. The rationale behind a price on a camera, scarcity, features, something unique about it. Maybe, you know, Clint Eastwood used this camera or this particular model camera for something, and it's very rare. So now the price goes up. It could be anything. Who knows? Boeing is so happy to bring out a 25 megapixel stack sensor when introducing the all-new M1 Mark III when it comes out. Would that be enough to satisfy the majority of Michael Four Thirds users? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think it would certainly temper a lot of complaints about not improving or growing. But does that translate into them buying the camera? That's kind of an unknown. Because, yeah, if they come out with a new model like the OM1 Mark III with the same 20 megapixel sensor, there's going to be a lot of complaints. But let's say the OM1 Mark III comes out with a 25 megapixel sensor. That will definitely temper a lot of the complaints about not growing or expanding or improving. But I don't know if that would translate into people actually buying the camera either, right? Is the problem with Micro Four Thirds the resolution? I'm not so sure, to be honest. Because the G9 Mark II, as great a camera as that is, with 25 megapixels, it's not, I don't know if that's selling any better than an OM1 Mark II. And Xmeta says, what are the next lenses you plan for the K3? The Sigma 100 to 300? No. I have the 55 to 300, the latest one, which I really like, and that's enough. Uh, it's just bird on a stick type photography. The autofocus is not good enough for bird in flight to keep investing in telephoto lenses. Um, I would like a wider lens though, something like wider than the 17 millimeter that I have. That's the widest lens I have is my 17. And I forget, I have to revisit. It might be a while before I go for a wider. I'd want to go wider, not longer. So if you have some good recommendations for a wide angle lens, zoom preferably, uh, I'm open to that. I'm open to that. Okay. Uh, T-Dub says I use a monopod as my as a handhold. My Canon R5 200 to 800 combination. Handholding gets me more bird and flight photos at odd angles, but the monopod results in sharper images at 120. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that too, right? Like, you know, you'll get sharper images with a monopod or tripod for the most, mostly, not always, but yeah, I love the monopods, tripods, and Tim also agrees about tripods. Yeah, always. And Jew says, I agree with you on tripods. Also for filters, just plain basics. When image stabilization tech matured, so many poo-poo the need for tripods, not for me. Yeah, there's always a need for tripod. And T. Dobbs says a tripod or a monopod makes it more awkward for shots nearing overhead. Hand holding requires a few more frames to guarantee more sharp photos with a longer, heavy rig, but the mobility has its virtues. Yeah, it's always trade-offs. Like I conceded to that point. The flexibility of hand holding cannot be beat, right? And you know, but the trade-off is how long can you hand hold your setup? Uh, and what are the odds that a scene is going to come into your frame where you're standing? A lot of things. There has to be the perfect storm of coincidences that the bird is flying towards you, that you're standing in that spot, and you're ready to go handheld with all the right settings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because yeah, you can whip that up real quick. But let's say you were shooting a bird on a stick and you dropped your shutter speed down, and then you turn around and you see the eagle coming towards you. Are you going to have time to change your shutter speed back, acquire focus, pull up your camera and lens and pull up and get that shot? Maybe. I mean, but maybe not. There's just so many variables, and there's a string of contingencies there together that have to come together for you to get the perfect shot. The odds are your odds are higher freehand to get that perfect shot because of the eagle coming, in that particular case. But the odds are so slim to begin with. I don't know. Anyway, let's not go back on that rant. Good morning, Darko. Good to see you. Uh, just going out to some street photography with the Z7 DX mode and 10 to 20 Sigma. That's a cool lens. Um, what I suggest is shoot in 1:1 aspect ratio, full frame with that 10 to 20. You'll get some vignetting in the corners, potentially, very likely, but it creates a very, very interesting look that's very similar to, I believe, Clayton, where he did a lot of square crops in street photography with some vignetting in the corners. Uh, I'm not 100% sure that's the photographer. That's the right name for the photographer I'm thinking of, or the images I'm thinking of. But it's very easy to do. Very easy to get vignetting, I should say, when you use APS-C lenses on full frame. Modern zooms seem so much better than what we had in our, yeah, definitely lens technology's improved a lot with zooms. Definitely. See, Randy's here. Good to see you. And uh, the stream is frozen. Yeah, sorry about that. And I don't know why my chat just jumped all the way back up to this morning, but or earlier. And my new mouse has three options: the click button for Windows tablet, one for Android. Oh wow, one for Windows laptop. I would be using it strictly for this laptop. And I started using portrait mode instead of vertical mode. I guess that's what you meant. Wow, that's interesting. Interesting decision. And Marco says, no, our camera processors aren't likely using the latest manufacturing nodes. Only huge companies like NVIDIA, Apple, AMD, etc., can get capacity on leading edge nodes. Our cameras are probably 22 plus nanometers. Wow. Wow. I know, but nobody knows. But I agree. They probably are, much older. So I guess the trick is if anyone can figure out who's manufacturing the processors for our cameras, it's very likely you can kind of make a very good guess at what the uh, nanometer is, right? Because 22 nanometers requires more energy to run than a 6 nanometer, right? Because you don't need as many electrons to go through a wire. And OM1X, 20 megapixels is fine. Well, yeah, I mean, that is the argument, right? I don't think Anthony's arguing that 20 megapixels isn't enough. I think his concern is the that we need to keep improving and expanding, right? Not not the 20 megapixels isn't enough. I don't think he I don't think he has a problem with 20 megapixels, but I think it's more of a, OM system needs to show that they are continually innovating and improving and expanding. And X meta for Pentax, the DA 12 to 24 f4 is fine, and I love the Sigma 8 to 16. Okay. So I think the DA 12 to 24 is a bit pricey, but the Sigma 8 to 16, it might be more in my range. I'll look into those. You better write that down. The DA 12 to 24 and the Sigma 8 to 16. I think the 8 to 16 would be perfect because I have the 17 to 50, so I can go 8 to 16. So there's no overlap at all. The 12 to 24 is only giving me 5 more millimeters on the wide end, and then it overlaps from there. So I think the 8 to 16 looks good. Next meta says 7 millimeter, 22 millimeter applies to memory structures. Transistors are much larger. Silicon reached limits. Gallium is now moving in a bit, but mostly we will see more cores and larger cache. And I think architectural design of the processor, right? Uh, I read a very interesting read about the architecture of the M1, when it came out, and the architecture of the new Intel AI chips. They're kind of following the lead that Apple started. And nanometers only applies to memory structures. Yes, yeah, if we're talking about chips, right? Not transistors, capacitors, SMC chips, right? Surface chips. Uh, yeah, we're talking about just memory. Other structures, like he's talking about, transistors, diodes, and things like that, uh, they control or regulate voltage and energy. We'll just say energy. We'll just wrap it all up. They control energy. How much energy passes or not passes, how quickly it passes, or how much is available when it's needed. These are more of the gears of the uh, circuit board versus the brains, right? So the gears have to be a certain weight. If you think of it this way, gears have to be a certain weight to be able to turn a certain amount of certain amount of energy. If you have very small gears, it's only going to, you know, I'm getting mixed up here, but think of it as the gears. Think of the memory chips in the processor. Those things are like the brains. Um, John says, I bought the Olympus Stylus SC12 about 6 months ago. Okay. Oh, okay. I know which camera that is. CCD sensor. While it's retro front, it reminds me that I don't miss those cameras after all. Yeah, right. Because I have an SZ30, which is, I don't know how much newer that is. It's probably just came out a year later, but it's fun and it's really fancy. I love the chrome on it. Let me show it to you. It's really a cool camera. It reminds me of the Cylons from the 1980s, Battlestar Galactica. But yeah, I think this is the coolest looking camera. Doesn't have a flip screen or anything, but it does have a little pop-up flash. Has a cool little zoom lens on it. Let's see if there's power. Ooh, yeah. It has a panorama mode that popped up. The mode dial, I can't read it. White on silver text, as if even if I had good eyes, I wouldn't be able to read it. But let's see. So it's in panorama mode, 3D mode, high auto. So now we're in auto mode. The battery's low, but apparently there's a memory card in here. Nice. And look how big this LCD screen is. It's pretty big. Look, face detect. You can see, wait, face detect. I don't know when this camera came out, but oh, the battery died. But just barely had enough power to close the lens. Compact. This camera is a lot of fun. I took some really nice pictures with this. Uh, If OM system does not look like they're moving forward in technology, I'm afraid the company might die and I'm not able to make a new camera and lens moving forward. Yeah, so like I said, I think your concern is more about the perception and innovation that OM system is putting work into research and development, et cetera, et cetera. Not so much that you need 24 megapixels, right? Or that you can't make do with 20 megapixels, but in the future, when you want to upgrade, you want to see some improvement. And good morning, Rob. Getting up early in Arizona desert is the only way to get ahead of the terrible heat. Yeah, it got hot here real quick too. And oh man, my chat jumped. It's weird. It says 3:29 p.m. and then the next chat message is 1:42. Even though it's on the same, doesn't make any sense. The chat window. Yeah. So again, I'll just let Anthony make his point rather than me try to make it for him, right? He says if OM system does not move forward with new technology, I'm afraid the camera and lens company might die, seen by the masses, as they're not moving forward. And software gimmicks are not going to keep OM system alive. Well, I would say they're not gimmicks. I think they're actually very useful tools. Uh, we don't want to talk about future things like if they're thinking about using AI scale, upsizing, or noise reduction AI in camera. Again, I wouldn't call these gimmicks until we see them, right? A lot of people call the art filters gimmicks, but I like them. To me, they're not gimmicks, they're just creative choices. Uh, so from my point of view, I don't look at anything that they add in the camera as a gimmick. It's along the lines of it's better to have them and not use them than use them and not have them. But if they come out with a camera that has no hardware changes at all, only software, because that was a big complaint about the Mark II. Is the Mark II just firmware updates? They say there's some hardware there that is, whatever. But the OM1 Mark II is a good example of the point you're trying to make is that essentially software updates. That's not going to cut it. So I'll agree with you there that if they release the OM1 Mark III with some more features, but the hardware is virtually identical, TruePic 10 processor, 20 megapixel stack sensor, you know, uh, 200 frame buffer, et cetera, all the dual card slots, all the hardware is the same, but then all of a sudden you can now use the grad ND filter in video, and you can't do that in the Mark II. That would be one example. It's like, that's great, but what did you really do? Right? Did you really expand or grow or put some work into calling it a Mark? Don't call it a Mark III just because you can do a grad ND filter in video now, because everybody's asking for that, and I would be very disappointed. So I take your point. I just think using the word gimmick's a little harsh. Uh, the issue with increasing megapixels in smaller sensors that affects the dynamic range of noise. You can only go so big on a really small sensor. Higher megapixel density hurts small sensors. Yep. For all the reasons that I talked about early on in the stream, right? Can they improve the noise floor? Can they adapt to the pixel density versus the wavelength of light? You know, because the light's going to land somewhere. Is it going to land on a pixel, or is it going to land on a wire, or is it going to land on, you know, or just reflect back? Because sensors, if you look at a sensor has some shine to it, right? Because of the glass. So If you see any reflection on a sensor, that's light that's not reaching your sensor, right? So maybe they can improve the reflectivity of the glass that goes on top of the sensor, or the reflectivity of the silicon itself, so that they can add some impurities into the silicon to make it less reflective. I mean, you can go crazy, go crazy with the fine print on sensor design. And it's not my place to talk about it because I'm not an engineer. Um, and our filters can be really fun. Yep. Yeah. But yeah, I know where you're coming from, Anthony. It's not from a You're not being critical of the features in of themselves or 20 megapixels. You think everything is great, but it's really what's next. Is it going to be an improvement, right? Are they going to show us that they are working on things? Yeah, I know where you're coming from. And software gimmicks are okay unless they want to pay extra for them or a regular fee like Rico now. Oh, I didn't know Rico was charging for extra stuff. I'm thinking though, my K3 Mark III does have some like stuff in there where like it was like features, but I'd have to pay for them. I don't know. I have to look into that. I'm just getting familiar with it. Maybe it's my other camera. I think it was the Mark III. It had graduated ND, but it wasn't available. So is that something I have to pay for if I want it? I don't know. And shooting the M1X on one wireless to my Windows tablet. Oh, wow. Okay. And there's a reason the biggest tech companies have many more software engineers than hardware. The software and algorithms are what make the hardware useful. I value the software innovations as well. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I thought the word gimmick in of itself was a little harsh, but I know where you're coming from, right? Goes back to what I said earlier. The opposite of the truth is another truth. You're not wrong, Anthony. Not at all. You can look at these as just gimmicks, right? But at the same point, Marco's not wrong either. Very good software integration to be able to utilize the hardware. Just think about it. If you had a bunch of really hardcore software, and if you took the engineers that were developing the software now, and if they were able to somehow put that into, say, the M1 Mark One, the original, if they could do that, what would the M1 Mark One be capable of right now? Hence, that's why it's had so many firmware updates. You know, they put a lot of energy into updating. Fuji is a good example too. But in the past, companies used to put a lot of work into their older models with older hardware through software, through firmware updates. We're not seeing that so much now. All of the firmware updates in my OM1 Mark One, until the very last one, they were mostly bug fixes. But the latest one, 1.6 or 1.7, that's where they actually put in some compatibility or put some improvement in the focusing algorithm, right? What if they went back and improved the autofocusing algorithms that they have in the OM5 Mark II and put that into the OM5 Mark One? They could do it very easily for that, right? So that it's important it, in building brand loyalty to continually update your older hardware. Because if I'm going to buy another camera from OM Systems, and they have a history of updating the firmware, I'm going to have a very high level of confidence that the camera I'm buying today is going to be a better camera tomorrow, right? Uh, Nikon's doing that currently. They're doing a lot of work in firmware to make their current hardware even better. So yeah, it's an all hands on deck, all in approach because the market is so competitive. Sony's the worst at updating firmware. They will issue a firmware for a bug fix. My Sony A7R5, I still have problems with it, particularly with it not shutting off on its own. Supposedly, I just updated the firmware. Supposedly, they fixed it because I saw a specific line item fixing when the camera does not power off. No, my camera still doesn't power off when I want it to. Imagine your camera not turning off when you turn the power switch. Yeah, my A7R5. So I take the camera out of my bag. It's burning hot because it was inside my bag while it was on, and the battery's dead. So I get to my location on site. I have to change batteries because the battery, the fresh battery I put in there when I packed it up, by the time I got to the frickin' site, location, the battery's dead. And God knows what damage I did because of the heat generated uh, to the camera itself and the circuits, because heat is the enemy of electronics. Sony better fix that. I'm telling you. But they are the worst at updating cameras with new features. Why can't they put focus stacking in an A6600? Or, it's basically the same as the A67. They can put focus stacking in their older camera models, but they don't. Anyway, uh K3 has some, yeah, I thought that was weird. I saw two or three line items for some features, and I'm like, I can't activate these unless I visit. There was some small prompt in the menu about visiting Pentax to get these features. And Mark says Panasonic has an excellent 25 megapixel sensor. I see no more noise than my OM1. Right. In practice, right? In practice, how much difference is there really? Probably none, just like you're saying, Mark. The noise that I'm seeing is on the DP review site when I put a 25,000 ISO image next to a 25,000 ISO image between the two cameras. There's just the tiniest bit hint more noise on their website. But in real life, I think I agree with you. We're not going to see any difference. But there's a little bit of difference on DP reviews. So I should have qualified that statement earlier. So I apologize for that. Uh, where I'm seeing the noise difference is on the DP review site, not in my own personal experience. So I appreciate you sharing that with us and helping me to qualify my earlier statement because it's important to qualify. I jibber jabber up here a lot, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. But if I can qualify a statement, I should try to qualify my statements a little more. But don't take anything I say as gospel, please. It's getting very hard for them to compete with the big boys. Can't go high, so go low. Fixed lens M43 might do well at a reasonable price. Yeah, that's the trick, right? Reasonable price. But like I said, Panasonic released one recently, and so has Canon. No idea how those are selling, because most people don't, track it. But so I guess you missed the wide-angle lens line. So Pentax 12 to 24 is fine, but a bit of CA, plentiful fine detail. And then I love the 16, the widest AF rectilinear for K mount. Okay. Yeah, I think the 8 to 16 is on my short list now. The 12 to 24, just gaining 5 millimeters, that may not cut it for me. I would want to go 8 to 16, even if I have to pay a little more. If it's a lot more, then I'll have to reevaluate which lens makes sense. But like if the 8 to 16 is twice as much as 12 to 24, I'd probably still get the 8 to 16. But if it's four times the cost, which I seriously doubt, but you know, it's all give and take, like everything in life. And cameras would be a subscription. That would be scary. That would be scary, scary. So I didn't get a chance to talk about AI and all of that. I know Darko wanted to talk about that. I'll have to do that next stream because we're already at the 2 hour, and AI in photography is a whole 2 hour subject. If I talk about it, it's going to be a couple hours. Um, okay, looks like I'm all caught up on the chat. So let me share a couple images first, and then maybe we'll call it. So I shared these. If you guys are on my Flickr and Instagram, you don't need to worry about this. You've seen them already. But I use bird detect on my OM3 with the 75, no, this with the 60 millimeter macro lens with bird detect to capture this bumblebee in flight. Now the bird detect does work on bugs. Not as good as it works on birds, because I did lose track quite often on these bugs. But when it did track the bug, I got a shot like this, which I love. 60 millimeter macro, OM3, bird tracking, pro capture, 1/2000th of a second or higher. I don't know. If you go to my Instagram, I have all the EXIF data there. Another image here with the 60 macro. This is heavily cropped, and yet I still got really nice detail on the eye. You can see all the little patterns there. Very shallow depth of field. The EXIF is what? ISO 4000. So this goes back to what else we talked about earlier about noise reduction in Photolab. Are they going to be able to do this in camera? Then this would be very useful. But I don't know if I would do it at the expense of battery life when I can just do it on my computer later. Yeah, this was using bird detect. And I use my typical bird settings like 1/2000th, in this case 1/2500, ISO 3200, 60 millimeter macro lens. Now I didn't capture quite as much detail. You can't quite see, well, you can't see at all the textures in the eye and things like that. That's a combination of maybe focus is slightly off and or a high ISO, and then trying to reduce no. And this is heavily cropped. This image is 1 megapixel, 1.08 megapixels for the whole image. Right in here on the fly is probably like a quarter megapixel. Very, very small. Very small. This image is 4 megapixels. So it makes a big difference how close you can get and the ISO that you use. This image here is 2.5 megapixels. And yet it's an ISO 1600, so I was able to retain a lot of the details on this particular image. So this image, let's compare these two images side by side. On the left is the Pentax K3 Mark I. On the right is the OM3 with the 35 millimeter CCTV lens, soap bubble lens. Now, because I use DxO to process this and I use DxO color science, for the most part, these images have very similar color. It's a little bit warmer on the right side, but other than that, and that might be, because I just adjusted all these by eye, right? But let's see the difference in the soap bubble. So this is a good example of the lens elements. Over here on the left, let me zoom way in for the stream. Over here on the left, you see these onion rings, right, in the bokeh. Over here on the right, you do not see any onion rings, but you see the soap bubble. So you see a soap bubble effect on both. It's more pronounced on the right. But on the left side, you see it in addition to the soap bubble, like the soap bubbles up here are not that strong, right? Up in here. But on this camera, the soap bubble effect is pretty strong across the frame. But onion rings are caused by a spherical glass. So the Sigma 17 to 50 f2.8 is using a spherical elements. I don't even have to look at the lens design chart or cutout to know that because I can see it right here. We have spherical elements, we have onion rings. Over here on the right, no spherical elements. And yet, and that's why there's the lack of onion rings, but a very low element count, which means they're, because there's no spherical glass, they're not correcting for the soap bubble effect. It's not correcting for contrast. An spherical glass tries to make many different types of corrections in one piece of glass. And that's why they use the spherical elements in higher end lenses to keep the weight down, is because they can use one piece of glass to try to solve multiple defects in image quality. And when they start using multiple spherical elements, they're making multiple corrections. You'll see typically multiple spherical elements in zoom lenses because as you're zooming in and out, it has to make multiple corrections along the way. And prime lenses, you'll typically see 2 or 3 in the higher end glass. Lower end glass, you might see 1 because the spherical glass is very, very expensive to make. And that's why you don't see it in these budget prime lenses from Seven Artisans and Astahori and TT Artisans. They never use the spherical elements because they're expensive. And if they want to keep a certain price point, uh, they're not going to be able to do it. And that's why those lenses will never be as good optically as the higher end glass, not just because of the spherical elements, but the overall design, manufacturing tolerances and coatings, and because doing coatings is not cheap either. Having really good coatings on your lenses. That said, they're good enough for 99% of us as enthusiasts, even professionals. And the side effect of not using a spherical glass is we get very smooth, buttery bokeh without onion ring effects in the speculars. So that's why I really like the Viltrox and TT Artisans and Seven Artisans, even though the lenses are a little bigger and heavier in some cases. I don't know how Viltrox is doing it, how they're making small compact lenses, lightweight, because they're using a lot of plastic. But uh, if you look at some of the lenses that were released from TT Artisans, Seven Artisans, they are pretty big and heavy. They have a 50 millimeter f1.8 that's like double the size of my 55 Zeiss 1.8. However, optically, that lens is almost as good as my Zeiss. In addition, the bokeh is a little bit smoother because there's no spherical elements in it. So they had to use multiple elements to make up for the lack of a spherical elements to get the optical quality that is near professional level for a low price. I mean, it's all, you know. Anyhow, uh, I thought this comparison between these two images was a great illustration of a lens that's trying to do, because this lens is definitely sharper. You can see it here. The Sigma lens is sharper than the CCTV lens. But this Sigma lens, when it was brand new, was like $500-600. This lens here was never more than $30. It's still $30 to this day. Um, but from a creative standpoint, I find this image on the right with the soap bubble bokeh more pleasing, right? But it's a subjective choice. maybe I want an optically sharper image, I'm going to take the Sigma over here on the left. Look at how soft it got here in the corner versus the Sigma if I zoom way in. So optically, the Sigma is a much better lens. But from a creative standpoint, I really like the image on the right. I like the image on the right more than I do on the left. You can compare another two. How about let's do this one. Image on the left, Sigma lens with the Pentax. Image on the right, OM3 with the CCTV lens. Again, I like the image on the right better. It's just more pleasant, a little bit softer, lower contrast. And this doesn't have any speculars in it for us to see the soap bubble effect. You might see a little bit up here, but for the most part, and again, over here, you're not seeing any onion ringing because there's no speculars. So this lens on the left, the Sigma, is optically better in every way. Well, which image do I like better? I like this one for this particular subject. Uh, we can do this one and this one. Whoops. Image on the left, Sigma. Image on the right, CCTV lens. Again, if I punch in, clearly the Sigma is sharper. But overall, I think I actually prefer the Sigma on the left for this image. I'm getting consistently warmer images here with the CCTV lens. That might be just the color sign to the camera though, because these are not the same camera. Okay. Um, yeah, macro with insect and flight. Yeah, that was tough. That was a tough one. And then Gray Vanzini, I have a CCTV lens. Yeah, you have to take it out. So what you want to do is take, I don't know which one you have, but take pictures wide open, close, so you get a very shallow depth of field with lots of busyness in the background, like leaves and flowers, and see if you get a swirly bokeh. And then take pictures at night with lots of speculars and see if you get a soap bubble effect. And then see if you can combine all this in a single image, if you just want to get crazy. But then once you kind of get to know the flavor and uh, characteristics of the lens, you can then start to use it creatively in your photography and make it part of your style. Yeah, that makes sense. It would be a difficult lens to find in K-mount. If I remember, I think I was shopping this lens. You just reminded me, or you jogged my memory. I was finding it left and right for the Nikon, right? For half the price of what it was for like the Pentax. So this is a case where same identical lens, different mounts, but one mount's a little bit rare. So the price is higher, right? But okay, everyone, we'll call it here. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. Please remember to support my live streams and everything I do here with donation links down below and buy me a coffee or using my affiliate links and or participating in the next live stream in the chat section or clicking the like button, subscribing. All of that stuff is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for joining me today. I had a lot of fun. Hopefully I didn't spew too much BS today. I do in every stream when they're this long. I'm bound to say some BS. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. But you guys have a great rest of your day, good rest of your week. Eat healthy, exercise, be healthy. I want to see you guys again for a long time, and I really appreciate it. I hope to see you again soon.